Welcome, everyone. My name is Adam Savitt. I'm Director of Communications at the Center for Security Policy. Happy New Year. Welcome to our 2021 webinar series. I hope everyone's holding up okay in challenging circumstances. We will continue to bring you the latest national security information and analysis on a weekly basis. Today's program is entitled More Extreme Than Obama, Biden's National Security Team Will Fundamentally Transform American Sovereignty, featuring my center colleagues, John Rossomando, our Senior Analyst for Defense Policy, and Michael Waller, our Senior Analyst for Strategy. Remember that you are in listen-only mode, but we encourage you to ask questions. You can use the Q&A box on your GoToWebinar control panel. And this event will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel, as well as on our website, securefreedom.org. With that, I'll hand it to Michael Waller. Thank you.
Well, hi, everybody. It's nice to be here and talk about something very different now, which is Biden's national security team that he's putting together for his first part of his administration. And whereas Barack Obama relied on a Republican to be his Secretary of Defense and a Marine Corps four-star general to be his national security advisor, the Biden-Harris team has picked a whole different cast of characters. So we're going to take a look at that with my colleague John Rossomando here at the Center for Security Policy, and just sort of go back and forth through who a lot of these people are and what their backgrounds are and what we can expect from them over the next 4 years. I'll start out by saying, if you liked Stalinist agent Alger Hiss, you're going to love the Biden administration. You've got Biden's CIA director designate actually has a picture, a photo, a portrait of Alger Hiss on his wall at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. So you figure if he's going into the CIA, you can see the kind of administration that that Biden is putting together. John, why don't you kick it off?
Well, one of the things that I've, talking about former Assistant Secretary of State Burns, when he was in the State Department, he was in an important role when it came to dealing with the so-called Free Syrian Army. He turned to groups like the Syrian American Council and the Syrian Emergency Task Force, which have documented links with the Syrian Brotherhood. One of the executive board members of the Syrian Muslim Brotherhood, Mohammed al-Jubi, told me personally that a lot of members of this group were former Syrian Brotherhood leaders. And one of the interesting things was that Burns had a woman named Khulud Kandil, who was the niece of the Muslim Brotherhood Prime Minister of Egypt, Hisham Kandil, who was in charge of outreach to the Syrian rebels. And she was found through FOIA documents feeding false information about the Free Syrian Army to say that they were moderates. The Syrian American Council brought in this cleric named Sheikh Mohammed Ratib al-Nabulsi, who endorsed suicide bombings, killing Jews, killing homosexuals, and so forth. And
wait, so you're saying these are people who Burns was personally pushing while he was in the previous administration?
Well, when he was in the previous administration, he was directly involved with supporting the so-called Free Syrian Army and pushing the idea that they were moderates. He worked with the head of the Free Syrian Army, who later endorsed Al-Qaeda. So that's the kind of people he was pushing.
And now he's going to be running the CIA.
Exactly. It really is.
I wonder if he'll bring his Alger Hiss portrait with him.
Yeah, very heartwarming. I mean, the entire cast of characters that Biden is bringing in were involved in in Obama's failed Middle East policy that included supporting people who were aligned with Al-Qaeda, people who gave our arms to Al-Qaeda, ISIS, etc. And they were supposedly democratic. I have lots of friends who were former Assad opposition people who said that the Obama administration shunned liberals who share our values, instead went for the most extreme Islamist elements.
Yeah, well, This brings us now to Biden's national or director of national intelligence chief, Avril Haynes. She was a top national security advisor to Obama, and she was NSC legal counsel. So she was a lawyer. She's the one who secured the legal approval for Obama's national security policies and strategies, including unmasking people, including the framing of the whole Russian collusion narrative and the abuses of intelligence that went on with that, with the person that she aims to follow in the footsteps of, which was Jim Clapper. Her bio if you viewers would like to follow this online, Biden's transition team bio is called buildbackbetter.gov, and punch on the national security tab and you can follow the names of some of the individuals that we're talking about today. But her bio, Biden's got this sort of a aggrieved group team to show how diverse he is. In his biography of this otherwise very accomplished national security lawyer, who's certainly on the left, he's referred to as the first woman 3 times in the bio. So you can see there's throughout the whole personnel list of the Biden team, it's not necessarily the best people who he's choosing. It's to fill a certain amount of quotas, it believes, because they obsess so much over it, just like they avoid mentioning China, but we'll get to that later. John, what else do you have to say about her?
Well, the other things that I have to say about her is that she's the kind of person who fills the the narratives. She's not going to look at the facts on the ground. I mean, if you look at the way that the Obama team ran its foreign policy, it was all about anti-colonial narratives and so forth. If you looked at how it was actually implemented, rather it was the Muslim Brotherhood being victimized by the secular regime of Mubarak or Sisi or anything like that. I think that's what we can expect. More things driven by politics than by actual strategic needs for the United States.
Yeah, you see that on the national security page where climate change is the first national security issue that they seem to be approaching, and they keep talking about climate and gender and a whole lot of other things that really, it's a real stretch to call them national security issues, but Biden says they are.
Well, it's kind of funny considering that China's overall CO2 emissions have gone up dramatically despite the whole Paris Accord stuff, and while the United States CO2 emissions have declined dramatically since 2007. So it's just kind of funny to see that they're putting political in front of strategic interests. I mean, then you have over at the Defense Department, he's putting General Lloyd Austin, who ran CENTCOM from 2013 to 2016, who was described as leading a tyrannical and a Stalinist kind of a command at CENTCOM, which the IG of the DoD found may have resulted in people giving depressed intelligence about the capabilities of ISIS, everything to make it sound good that we're doing well. I mean, that man lost $500 million in a train and equip program for jihadists that included people like Mustafa Sajari, who now is commander of jihadists in Afrin and is a Syrian mercenary for the Turks, and has been implicated in human rights abuses.
So General Austin, Lloyd Austin, he's a 4-star, former combatant commander. That's a pretty distinguished record of its own right there. But he was still too active. He was still on active duty, too soon. There's not that. The same with General Mattis before, but Mattis was a different kind of general. He was like him or not, he was a very cerebral guy, and he had broad bipartisan support with a very distinguished military career, and he was a strategist. You don't have a strategy or strategic background with General Austin, so it strikes me as a strange pick for a defense secretary, especially if he has to have a special waiver from the Senate to now have a repeat of appointing a practically active duty 4-star to become a civilian secretary of defense.
Well, I think that it has to do with the fact that Joe Biden can't handle anyone who isn't a yes man. Michelle Flournoy, like her, dislike her. There's a lot of people on both sides, Republicans and Democrats, who admire her. But at least she has a reputation as a bit of a pragmatist and as somebody who is an independent thinker. General Austin had a reputation as a yes man, and he was a political, quote unquote, political animal, according to the Observer. And he's not somebody who I think will tell Joe Biden, Mr. President, this is the wrong way to go.
Yeah, it's funny that Obama's old first defense secretary, Robert Gates, sort of an established Republican, he looked at Biden and his whole national security outlook in his memoir, and he said that Biden has been, quote, been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades.
Yeah, well,
this is coming from the man who was Barack Obama's Secretary of Defense, and so you would think that Biden would try to correct that. I mean, you have Michelle Flournoy's got different points of view from us on a whole lot of issues, but at least she's a really, really brilliant, very well organized, very innovative person who I think would have made a fine Secretary of Defense under a Biden administration.
Well, I'd agree with you there. I mean, look back at everything that Biden opposed as a senator. He opposed the Trident missile, which is the backbone of our nuclear deterrence. He opposed the deployment of the Pershing II missiles in Germany, West Germany, that served as a bargaining chip with the Soviet Union that brought about some of the nuclear pacts under Gorbachev. He supported the SALT II treaty, even though the Soviets had repeatedly violated it. It's little wonder why he's a supporter of the Iran nuclear deal. I mean, failure and failure.
Yeah, that's going to be a big issue, which now brings us to Anthony Blinken, who is the designate to be our next Secretary of State. What do you have to say about Blinken?
Well, I'd have to say about Blinken is that he's again one of these PC people in the Middle East. I talked to you a bit ago about the Syrian American Council. He was involved in giving them a place at the table when he was in the State Department. And I think that we can look to him just being another yes man. He doesn't have any heft to him or any intellectual capabilities. I think that Joe Biden is pretty much adverse to people who think for themselves.
Yeah, well, Blinken is pretty tight with Biden and with John Kerry, for that matter, when both Biden and Kerry were in the Senate and respectively chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Blinken was the chief of staff for both of them. So he's very comfortable with them in executing their policies and perhaps devising some. And this brings in John Kerry as the now former Secretary of State, who's now head of the climate policy for Biden. So you can see where now this nation's former top diplomat is now running a whole new operation out of the White House or somewhere in the administration to promote climate change. So I see this sort of John Kerry integrating this with longtime underlings like Tony Blinken to, make climate change a cornerstone of American national security policy.
I don't see the link between climate change and deterring the Chinese and the South China Sea, deterring Russia in Ukraine, the Baltics, in the North Pacific, in the Arctic, or any of that. I mean, I just look forward to the look on his face when he goes to Beijing and Xi Jinping pretty much just tells him where to go, because China is the #1 contributor of greenhouse gases in the world.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if some senators during his confirmation hearing will ask him about his job as managing director of the Penn Biden Center, that Chinese communist-funded entity that was raking in tens of millions of undeclared dollars under Biden's name. This guy, Blinken, was running it. So there's going to be, I hope, a few questions raised about his involvement in with the communist Chinese and why he was so secretive about where his money was coming from.
Well, I think that the Chinese are going to be a major issue, considering, you look at Hunter Biden. I mean, if he had been any of these confirmation people who are up for confirmation, it would be a question about their qualifications for a national security clearance, because it's a major blackmail target. I mean, I think we need to look at what sort of concessions. Look at Taiwan. I mean, that right now the Chinese have escalated some of their provocations against Taiwan, and the Trump administration just sold several $1 billion of military hardware to Taiwan. Will the Biden team work to roll that back to appease the People's Republic of China? I mean, I think that if we look at the way that the Obama people handled Russia, which was abysmal. I mean, gave Vladimir Putin every reason to think that if he invaded Crimea, that he wouldn't get any blowback. I mean, don't forget that when they did the reset, it was a few months after Georgia. Instead of keeping the pressure on Putin, they went and released it. And then I think that's a major look at we need to look at the patterns here.
Yeah. Now you just mentioned something a second ago there. The Arab countries far better than I do, but wasn't Blinken one of the top people in the Obama administration to preside over the policies that created a vacuum in northern Iraq that led to the rise of ISIS?
I mean, Blinken was involved with supporting the policies. I mean, one of the major things I think is Colin Powell, who is being named as Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. He was in charge of the DoD's Middle East Bureau, and they did nothing to help Iyad Alawi, who would have allowed our troops to stay longer, and instead they kept Maliki in place. And
so with all these names can get kind of confusing to people watching, but if we can just put it into context here, this was when Obama was planning this big pullout from Iraq, just to leave Iraq at the mercy of the jihadis, correct?
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly.
And Blinken, pardon?
Go ahead.
Go on. Oh no, well, Blinken had a role in that. I'm trying to establish what that role was. This will certainly come up in his confirmation hearings, but he likes to take credit for being part of a strategy to defeat ISIS when he was really part of the strategy that allowed the rise of ISIS. And in fact, remember around, was it 2013 or so, when the Obama administration had no policy for the mess that was there, and they were hoping that Vladimir Putin would come in with Russian forces to stabilize Syria?
Well, that was definitely a big mistake, and then they turned around hypocritically a year later and realized that Russia wasn't the friend that they thought that it was. And I know from a Syrian opposition, I guess you would call him diplomat, envoy, or something like that John Kerry told him that they would do nothing about Hezbollah because they didn't want to interfere with the Iran deal. And I got that from a first-hand source who was there in a meeting in Geneva with Kerry, and they were complaining about how Hezbollah was supporting the Assad regime. So the Obama administration goes in, we're going to try to topple Assad, but then they end up supporting the people who keep Assad in power.
Right, and bringing in the Russians at the same time, because at that time, Putin was on his back as a world leader. He had nothing. He had lost a lot of respect, and Russia had lost its standing. And miraculously, the Obama and John Kerry and Tony Blinken team came in and rescued Putin by wanting him to come into Syria to bail us out because we had no strategy. So let's keep an eye on him and on his involvement in that between now and his Senate confirmation hearings, so we can get some answers.
Well,
now, what about? Go ahead.
I said, well, I would
Yeah.
say that pretty much sums up the entire Biden team, because they were all involved in the disaster in the Middle East that left Syria in tatters, that Libya is still in tatters, and that gave Turkey unfettered access. Well, hopefully the rumors that Biden will be tougher on Erdogan come out to be true, but these guys let the Middle East burn.
Yeah. And then Blinken, now, to get back to him himself, he was also in charge of Obama's global refugee program. So these are all these refugees and so-called refugees flooding Europe from the Middle East and coming into the United States and into Latin America and other countries. This guy was in charge of that program, wasn't he?
Well, the refugee program turned out to be a complete and utter disaster, because ISIS, Al Qaeda, and other terrorist groups were able to use these camps for recruitment. ISIS was able to forge passports in these camps, and all of a sudden, they're saying, well, we need to let more of these refugees in. We have no way of knowing who they are, where they're from, because the documents and from the towns and villages they came from were destroyed as a result of the war. Then we ended up having the Paris attacks. We ended up having the attacks in Molenbeek as a result of some of these people who were refugees. ISIS released documents online claiming that they had seeded the refugee flow.
Yeah. Well, okay. Blinken is going to be the subject of a lot of inquiries on this. I would hope. I'm not too confident in a lot of senators on this, but I'm sure that there will be a few who will raise this, and certainly others should study this themselves and come up with answers, and then questions also on Blinken. Let's turn a second to domestic national security issues. The Secretary of Homeland Security designate for Joe Biden, Alejandro Mayorkas.
Well,
what's your take on him?
Well, my take on him is that he's an advocate for open borders, and he's somebody who I have doubts will keep an eye on the cartels and their human trafficking. I think we're going to see a sea change away from the Trump administration's policies under his leadership. It will be interesting to see how people like AOC and some of the more radicals are able to influence. They've been calling for the abolition of ICE and for free entry, illegal for these illegal migrants. So I'm really not terribly hopeful. It will also be interesting to see if groups like some of the Islamist groups are brought back in to do some of the trainings that they've done under the Obama administration.
Yeah. In the Obama administration, Mayorga ran our Customs and Immigration Service under the Department of Homeland Security. He was the #1 official with the hands-on responsibility for dealing with illegal immigration and admission of refugees and others into the United States. So now he's heading the top rank there at the Department of Homeland Security. Curiously, the Build Back Better website of Biden keeps promoting Mayorga's really greatest credential. Mentions it twice on his biography page. The first thing on his page is that he's the first immigrants and Latino to be nominated to be head of the Department of Homeland Security. So this again seems to be a more of a calculated diversity move than really finding the best person for the job. it's kind of significant because I've worked a lot with the Latino community for many, many, many years, and the liberals never really considered Cuban Americans to be real Latinos, mainly because they were, anti-communist and anti-socialist. And on this one, the Biden page keeps referring to him as a Latino, and then at the very, very bottom it says, "Oh, by the way, he's from Cuba." So yeah, he'll be an interesting guy to watch. He looks like kind of a swamp creature too, who's part of the revolving door, going in and out of government to a big law firm, to government, back to another big law firm, or a public affairs house again, or something like that. So he's got he's pretty swampy in his Washington career. The Biden's transition page on him says during his tenure at the Department of Homeland Security before, Mayorga led the development and implementation of DACA.
Well,
so Mayorkas is behind a lot of this mass immigration of bringing in people without even screening people, without even finding, what they would add to American society. And it looks like he's going to be the one in charge of bringing that back, along with the Secretary of State, Blinken, who was in charge of Obama's refugee policy. So we've got a pretty big mix coming here on how Obama's foreign and national security policies are going to affect our country.
Well, I'd have to say that the entire idea of unregulated immigration means that we don't get to find out, who's connected with organized crime, whether in places like Guatemala, El Salvador, or the cartels in neighboring Mexico. We don't get to find out if the people who they're bringing in from these refugees from Syria or wherever have connections to Islamist, jihadist groups or organizations, because they'll say it's civil rights, it's bigotry, it's hate, all this other stuff, instead of like national security. We want all people from all places, all walks of life, all colors, etc. in our country. But we want to make sure that they're our friends, not our foes.
Yeah, exactly. Screen them well. So you've got your DHS guy who doesn't have much of a track record of screening people who come into our country. What about, and interestingly too, you don't hear the pro-Cuban regime groups in the U.S. protesting Mayorkas as the DHS nominee. Usually they'll be outspoken in opposing Cuban Americans who are appointed to senior posts in the U.S. government because those people were anti-Castro regime or anti the current communist regime in Cuba. I haven't heard any of that coming from the pro-Castro groups concerning the incoming DHS secretary. Have you?
I haven't heard anything opposing his nomination. I think that we can expect that he will give us a very politically correct kind of approach. I don't know if he'll be as extreme as, say, somebody like AOC, but I think the fact that these people are quiet should raise red flags for concerned people.
Yeah, if Bernie Sanders and Ed Markey of Massachusetts and others vote to confirm him as DHS secretary, I think we have a right to be concerned. Now, what about our old, some of her known quantity? She's going to become the head of the Agency for International Development, which spends billions of dollars funding grassroots community organizing, legal reform type initiatives around the world, as well as doing really great humanitarian work. And this is Samantha Power, who was Obama's ambassador to the United Nations. She's going to be running this giant U.S. aid apparatus. What do you make of that?
Well, I make of it that she's had a lot of experience when she was in the National Security Council, working on the grassroots level with Muslim Brotherhood activists who encouraged the United States to get involved in toppling Gaddafi. You have people like Osama Mesh, who is a major U.S. Brotherhood individual. And don't forget that she was in the lead in trying to get the Obama administration involved in the illegal war in Libya. That instead of giving us a democratic, giving us a representative government, was hijacked by the most extreme elements, the Muslim Brotherhood groups linked with Al Qaeda and so forth. And I was told by a leading member of the Libyan community who worked with the Obama administration that once again, they went and shunned the more liberal, Western-minded people and embraced the more extreme folks. And ever since, we've seen Libya in a constant state of civil war that has lasted ever since. So if we can have Sam Power telling us to do this, who else is she going to support?
Yeah, she was also involved in the Islamist revolution in Egypt as well. The most populous Arab country and a big linchpin of Middle Eastern stability. She was part of that group to overthrow the Egyptian government and put the Brotherhood in. Well,
the thing about the Brotherhood, her and the rest of the Obama team, was they said that if we put the Brotherhood in, it will serve as a firewall against Al Qaeda. Instead, there was one of the Hillary emails, based on a source in the Egyptian intelligence, said the Brotherhood had close relationships with the jihadists. After they were toppled by the military, after they proved to be undemocratic and to be basically like the Mubarak.
And they have the same end goals as Al Qaeda.
Right, exactly.
The same end state as Al Qaeda. So, and this brings us to another thing. Remember, there were in around 2011 or so, the Obama administration, NSC. I don't know if Powell was part of this or not. They had Presidential Study Directive number 11, still classified. And from what we understand, that PSD 11 is what gave the strategic rationale for supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. If she was behind that, this one of the great things that the Trump administration can do in its last days in office is to declassify PSD 11, as we've been arguing for 2 or 3 years, and to put everything into context about what this next team is trying to do to destabilize our friends and allies in the region.
Well, definitely. According to a think tank from the United Arab Emirates, they were able to get FOIA docs that indicated that she was linked to PSD 11, that got the ball moving to back the radicals in Libya, to topple Gaddafi, to topple Mubarak, and replace them with extremists. I mean, I was about ready to say before that after the Brotherhood fell, they created terrorist groups like Leo al-Thara and the Revolutionary Punishment Movement. Now, in at least in one case, that group, which was linked to the Brotherhood, was claiming joint responsibility with ISIS for a bombing of police in Helwan, just outside of Cairo, in May of 2015.
Yeah. Well, now looking back at the Biden transition team's buildbackbetter.gov website in the national security tab, it credits several of Biden's nominees as having experience in combating other viruses or epidemics or even pandemics around the world in other capacities, like the Ebola virus or the Zika virus. And that's a good thing that kind of talent is coming on board now. But I find it very curious that the Biden team is fine with keeping the names of viruses of the place names in Africa where they were first discovered or originated, but they still can't bring themselves to say Wuhan virus or China virus or CCP virus or whatever for the pandemic that's sweeping us right now. They're giving China a total pass once again. You see this theme running subtly throughout the whole Biden national security website. Powers had experience in her own bio in there says combating the Ebola virus and the Zika viruses, but there's there's that inconsistency of keeping African place names but omitting Chinese place names for these viruses. There's a guy, by the way, it's talking about China. It's not a total panda hugging team that Biden has. I mean, it seems to be overwhelmingly, but there's a curious nominee that Biden has for coordinator for the Indo-Pacific on the National Security Council. That's Kurt Campbell. And Kurt Campbell's got a China government friendly past, sort of establishment past. He was a Kissinger fellow at the John McCain Institute, which really was pretty much identical to most of the Democrat mainstream establishment groups. So he's got this. He's running a public affairs and financial advisory fund called the Asia Group, but he isn't totally a panda hugger. I noted that when he was serving in the Obama administration previously, he helped set up the pivot toward Asia, which was an embrace of a lot of Beijing's initiatives. But when Trump was president, he began saying things supportive of Trump's policy toward China. And he even backed away from his Obama policy that he had been involved with before and went out to even praise Trump for his very innovative summitry with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. So it's going to be a very interesting team to watch, where you're going to have some people on there who are not complete panda huggers, and maybe that's why the Washington Post ran that editorial yesterday, denouncing Secretary Pompeo for opening up more U.S. government access to Taiwan, because that's forcing the Biden team to back away from that, because they do need to do things to appease Beijing, at least in their view.
Well, I would say that the most number one thing that needs to continue at the DoD is a focus on keeping Taiwan strong and keeping it maintaining the status quo, because it would be a disaster for us if the Chinese were to do what Vladimir Putin did in Crimea and just let the Chinese just go in and reassert governance of the island. They're a democratic government. They share our values. I think that maintaining them as a strong counterweight, along with aligning with building up our alliance with Japan, building up our alliance with Australia, which is really being squeezed hard by the People's Republic of China. Those are the things that I really I think that the Biden administration needs to focus. Mr. Kyle.
Kurt Campbell's going to be interesting because he has good relations with Japan. He got a special recognition from the Australian government. India has been pleasantly surprised that he was named to this Indo-Pacific coordinator post in the Biden administration. So I think you've got a divided team there. You've got your complete panda huggers who want to appease the Communist Party of China, and then somebody like Kurt Campbell, who, while he wouldn't be probably a good pick at all in a conservative administration, seems to be more in the American national interest than a lot of people on the Biden team. Did you ever take a look at one of the guys who's in charge on the transition team of these national security appointments? Thomas Zimmerman. One of these actors who was, very, very pretty well-known person among the people in the national security community, but not nationally known. But he's working sort of under the radar almost to vet and recruit and then clear national security appointments for the Biden-Harris administration. But he's supposed to become special assistant to the president for personnel. So one will assume that he's going to be the one approving all national security appointments once he's in the White House. But there's another side to him too. He had a title with the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences, which is a Chinese Communist Party enterprise in Shanghai, sort of a Communist Party think tank for the Chinese regime, and that's an institution that the FBI itself called, in quote, a front group for Chinese intelligence collection and overseas spy recruitment.
Oh, that definitely.
Just think of that. The person who in charge of national security appointments for the Biden administration was working for what the FBI called a front group for Chinese intelligence collection and overseas spy recruitment. How can you explain that?
I think that you can probably explain that in, either willful denial that that's what's going on when it's convenient. I mean, you look at the Trump Tower meeting, how that went on for years, Russian collusion, etc. So can we now say Chinese collusion now that, and that he's not going to vet people, who possibly otherwise, would have been weeded out in a saner time. I just think that if we're not focusing on our independence from the People's Republic of China, aren't we by fiat sanctioning the genocide that's going on in Xinjiang of the Uyghur people? Aren't we?
The subversion of our country, really, from the Chinese Communist Party. So follow this guy, Thomas Zimmerman. Thomas Zimmerman. He's the one who's vetting Biden's national security appointees, and who will be doing so in the White House. And he has worked for a Shanghai Communist Party front that the FBI said is a spy operation. So let's watch that very, very closely. And then to go further down the line, we don't even know all the people who have been appointed yet because they haven't been cleared or announced. But Biden is coming in with a very coherent, very structured, very organized national security team where a lot of the people know each other. Very different from what President Trump did when he came in, where it was sort of I must say, very different. But you're going down further down into the Justice Department, and I wanted to take a look at Lisa Monaco, who is the designee to be Deputy Attorney General, the number 2 person in the Department of Justice. She was one of the Obama counterterrorism people who didn't want to call certain Islamist groups terrorists, and who didn't even want to say that terrorism was terrorism. She was one of the big proponents of calling it violent extremism and not terrorism. So now she's being put in charge of running the Justice Department day to day as the Deputy Attorney General. She had performed a similar role as Chief of Staff of the FBI under Robert Mueller. So she's got a lot of national security and Justice Department experience, but now she's going to be the Chief Operating Officer of the Justice Department.
I think that we can expect from her a continuing sanitization. She won't want to look at whether threats from Iran or threats from Islamist terrorism. All she's going to want to do is focus on far-right terrorism, which, as we saw last week, is something that needs to be looked at. But I just think that we look at how they dealt back in the Obama administration when we had constant ISIS or Al-Qaeda inspired terrorist attacks, that she didn't want to deal with the real issues that at the time, pretending that it wasn't linked with an extreme interpretation of Islam didn't make it any less so.
Yeah, and that's the whole point. You need people running the Justice Department who are after all terrorists, not just a certain type of them. And this is a concern about Lisa Monaco. I just want to hit one more before we go and take questions from the audience, and that is somebody who doesn't have a national security portfolio at all, but he's got a China connection, and that is the Boston Mayor Marty Walsh. Marty Walsh is a union guy. He's now going to be running the Labor Department, but last September he flew the Communist Chinese flag at Boston City Hall. So he was pandering to Xi Jinping to bring money into Boston. He wasn't even, So what? Now you've got somebody running our whole Labor Department with an administration that wanted to before, and no doubt wants to again, ship more American jobs off to China, who's flying the communist Chinese flag in City Hall of Boston. So you've got all these, again, panda huggers again on the Biden team. So we'll leave that with Marty Walsh as Labor Secretary, as sort of the last of the characters we'll look at right now on the incoming Biden-Harris team, and then open it up for questions. Adam, what do you have?
Sorry for the delay. All right, let's start with, given the composition of the incoming Senate, which nominees should be most strenuously opposed? Will Manchin or King oppose any of Biden's people?
I think it's hard to say that they'll, oppose many of them. I understand that Blumenthal of Connecticut is opposed to granting a waiver to General Austin. A few other, members of Congress have raised objections because they granted a waiver for Mattis, that they don't want to make it a normal thing for former military leaders or flag officers to become secretaries of defense. But I don't really see anyone being defeated or voted down by the Senate.
Yeah, it's a really great question, but I mean, where do you begin? Do you fight if you have to pick one, is it the CIA director with all of his odd Middle East and connections, who has a picture of Soviet agent Alger Hiss on his wall, or is it the Secretary of State, who we talked about already, and all of his connections? It's really, really hard to tell who to oppose first. I would think that the Secretary of State should be extremely well vetted, as well as the CIA director, extremely well vetted, and the Director of National Intelligence as well, because they're the most critical posts and these are the most controversial people. The Secretary of Defense designate, less so. I think his biggest controversial item is going to be getting that waiver that some Democrats, as John had just said, already opposed.
Related question. I think this is about holding the GOP senators to account. Who can we count on to at least bring out the information in the hearings? If we can't stop them, and will they be given time to question?
I think that if we can give somebody like Senator Inhofe good information about some of these people who are going in at DOD about the squandering of $500 million to fund 4 or 5 fighters against ISIS, the whole train and equip things. I don't think somebody who fostered a hostile command and ran a really terrible operation at CENTCOM deserves a promotion.
Do you think the Chinese communists will see the Biden administration more as an ally, an adversary, or a subordinate?
Oh. It's such a simple question, but it's a really hard one to answer. It's if you look at what the Chinese official media is saying now, that means the Communist Party-controlled press, they're very, very hopeful about a Biden administration. They think they're going to get their way on a number of deals, but they also do recognize the Biden administration is going to have a very hard time backtracking on a lot of things that President Trump and especially Secretary of State Pompeo have put forward. So I think they see it as an opportunity. Now, whether it's as a partner or as a what were the questions? The terms?
Ally, adversary, subordinate.
I couldn't put it any better, but really that's it wouldn't be door number 2. I'd pick door number 1 on some and door number 3 on the other, either as an ally or as a subordinate. But then again, you do have the wild card of Kurt Campbell, who is really trying to engage other U.S. allies and friends like Japan, Australia, India, and others to keep China, to not dismantle everything that President Trump and Secretary Pompeo have been putting together.
Related, have Biden or his defense secretary ever expressed what they would do to protect or not protect Taiwan?
They really haven't said anything much about Taiwan. I think that's a big question. I think that you'll end up having Biden being more conventional, returning more to an ambiguous policy: would the United States defend Taiwan or not, as opposed to President Trump and Secretary Pompeo, who have been very strong pro supporting Taiwan against China. I think that's a big question mark.
Yeah, one of the big tests that China they've been prodding more than they had recently, and on Christmas Day, December 24th, 25th, in that 24-hour period, the People's Liberation Army Navy sent both of its aircraft carriers through the Taiwan Strait in the same day for the first time. This was a really big deal. It was a show of force, and it was a test of what the U.S. would say and how it would respond, and how the Biden team would respond. And the Biden team didn't respond at all.
That's kind of a reversing what happened back in 1996 when President Clinton sent a U.S. aircraft carrier through the Taiwan Strait as a reminder to the PRC to leave Taiwan alone. And that kicked off China's military buildup, because they didn't want to be humiliated again.
What will happen to the progress with Middle East peace, such as the Abraham Accords?
I would say that the Abraham Accords could be severely strained, especially if the Biden administration returns to the JCPOA Iran nuclear deal. The people like Colin Kahl over at DOD has been an opponent of Saudi Arabia. I think that we'll end up seeing these former allies of ours like UAE and Saudi pulling away from the Obama administration, and I think that you'll see separate arrangements made with Israel, because the fear of Iran is what has drawn these nations closer to Israel.
So there was a separate question about JCPOA. So let's just drill down on how much are they going to pursue that? Well, will they pursue that? And what are the chances of actually, getting back in?
I think there's a very high chance.
JCPOA is the Iran deal, so that's the official bureaucratic abbreviation for the Iran deal. But the Biden administration shows every commitment to restore that by any means possible.
And that would require a Senate vote or not?
No.
A lot can be done simply by the president's instructions or the Secretary of State's policy. But they would need congressional funding to make it happen. But of course, if you look at the makeup of Congress, that's very likely to happen.
Well, we have some more general questions.
Another good thing to ask John Kerry, if his climate position is Senate confirmable. I don't know if it is, but certainly everyone in the administration should be asked about all those pallets of cash that Secretary Kerry himself arranged to be shipped by aircraft into Iran as part of this Iran deal. So we haven't gotten to the bottom of that yet. So the fact that John Kerry is going to be back in the public eye as a U.S. government official, and we do have so many different venues in the various confirmation hearings to elicit legally binding answers from questions, there are some opportunities here to get to the bottom of it.
And of course, that was used to bolster the Iranian military and to fund Shiite terrorist groups around the Middle East, whether we're talking about the Houthis, which Pompeo just designated as terrorists, attacking shipping in the Red Sea, firing ballistic missiles at Saudi Arabia, I think that it'll also be interesting to see if the Biden administration holds Iran to the same standard it held Saudi Arabia to, because the Iranians have assassinated their opponents abroad, including one, ironically, in Turkey.
What about the concept of global warming or climate change as a national security issue? You know, and like, how much is window dressing, and how much is it really going to change policy? God forbid, you know.
Well, I think that they're going to go full bore, whatever that means. For classifying it as a national security issue is kind of just silly.
Yeah, when you're stretching national security to say that their sea levels are going to rise a few inches in many years, or even centuries, then you're really stretching the point, and you're politicizing the whole issue of national security. And certainly a lot of people around Biden are going to make a lot of money off this, and so there's a ton of money behind promoting this with all the government contracting and the government mandates. Once you wrap it as a national security issue, then it suddenly becomes a pro-defense issue, and then the military leadership will have to embrace it because it's the civilian leadership's instructions that they indeed do so. And then anybody who opposes a general or an admiral on climate change is therefore unfit to talk about national security, so they must be anti-military. That's the whole narrative you see that's going to be built up around what they used to call global warming until they realized global warming wasn't scientifically proven.
All right, well, Mike and John, any final comments before I just give an announcement? Or
I would
I just wanted to thank everybody for. Oh, John might have a comment, but I just wanted to thank everybody for tuning in and being part of us.
No, thank you everybody for following us. I think that past will be prologue, because we saw the terrible job that Biden's national security team did when they worked for Barack Obama, where they had blinders on to the people who they were dealing with. They turned a blind eye to Iran's human rights record. They went and supported both sides of the conflict in Syria. And if you ask any Syrian why the other country is such a mess, they'll blame Barack Obama. And by extension, we wouldn't have had that if we didn't have people like Secretary Burns, people like Samantha Power, people like Colin Kahl, and people like Anthony Blinken pushing bad policies. So I think that we're in for a really rough ride in the next 4 years.
all right, folks, that was our first event of 2021. We're planning to have these just about every week. We won't have any next week to skip for the inauguration. Our next event will be Wednesday, January 27th at 1 p.m., entitled Outlook for President Biden's National Security Policies After Week 1, moderated by Center President Fred Fleitz and featuring Niall Gardner of the Heritage Foundation and Claudia Rosette of the Independent Women's Forum. So see us for that. You can sign up, securefreedom.org. And we'll see you on the next one. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.